Nice antique. Wrong century. The laughter came almost instantly. That's the problem right there, everyone. Staff Sergeant Colby Marsh lifted his multi-tool for everyone to see, then pointed toward the old leather sheath hanging from an elderly man's belt. A knife built for one job and one job only. Nice antique. Wrong century. By the end of that morning, the same blade would build a shelter that no one else on the hillside could match, purify drinking water, and help start a fire before Marsh even finished arranging his demonstration gear. The laughter spread through the clearing, not loud, just enough to fit in. 30 people chose to laugh instead of staying silent. It lasted only a couple of seconds before fading away. Behind them, a kettle quietly rattled on a camp stove, completely unconcerned with the exchange. Somewhere beyond the trees, a blue jay called twice before everything became still again, as though even the forest had decided this moment wasn't worth interrupting. No one bothered to look at the old man's reaction. Silas Dunor never answered. His hand rested lightly on the weathered leather sheath at his side, the same calm way someone places a hand on the shoulder of a lifelong friend. He didn't tighten his grip because he had no reason to. At 75 years old, his heartbeat never changed. The knife on his belt had already proven itself in places Colby Marsh had never seen. If you believe a blade tested under real pressure is worth more than 16 and used features on a store shelf, let us know in the comments. Ridgeline readiness stretched across 400 acres of Appalachian foothills, and this was the 6th straight summer its weekend survival courses had sold out almost immediately after registration opened. The air carried the scent of damp hardwood and fresh instant coffee. Somewhere below the ridge, a creek rushed through the woods, loud enough to hear but hidden from view. A folding table displayed ferro rods, a boxed pump filter, and a spotless titanium cook set that had never touched an open fire. 30 students wearing brand new hiking boots stood in a loose semicircle, their phones already raised, waiting to capture whatever Staff Sergeant Colby Marsh would demonstrate next. Marsh handled the crowd with the confidence of someone who had built his reputation one course at a time. Clipped to his belt, a Leatherman signal reflected the morning light. It had been a gift from his military unit, engraved with his initials, and throughout the morning he referred to it as the only survival tool anyone would ever need. After 6 years leading the program, 9 survival certifications, and an online following of more than 61,000 people, the students naturally trusted every word he said before he even finished speaking. To be fair, much of that confidence was deserved. When one student struggled to strike sparks from her ferro rod, Marsh quietly stepped beside her, adjusted her wrist by only a few degrees, and within moments she was producing a shower of bright sparks. Everyone watching saw genuine skill. Nearby, another group worked with the portable water filter. Without even turning around, Marsh called out instructions that corrected the way they were priming it. He knew every specification on the packaging by memory, almost the way some people memorize sacred verses. After teaching nearly 90 courses and rotating more than $40,000 worth of survival equipment through his demonstrations each season, he had earned the right to trust the gear he recommended. What he had never questioned was whether faith in equipment could ever equal trust earned through experience. The first slight came almost absent-mindedly. While checking attendance from his clipboard, Marsh glanced at the worn leather sheath hanging from Silas's belt. "We'll get you equipped properly before lunch," he said casually. It sounded less like advice and more like the confident tone of a salesman who had already decided what his customer needed. Silas remained silent. He had heard that same voice in outdoor stores and gun shops from men young enough to be his grandsons. It had never bothered him before. It didn't bother him now. The second insult was deliberate. Marsh lifted his multi-tool for everyone to see, then noticed Silas standing quietly at the back of the group. "That," he announced, pointing toward the old sheath, "is exactly the problem. A blade designed to do only one thing. Nice antique. Wrong century." Still smiling for the cameras recording him, he gave Silas a friendly pat on the shoulder. "Don't worry, old-timer. Stay with me this weekend, and we'll get you caught up." The laughter returned. Light. Easy. Completely effortless for the people joining in. Silas didn't even look at Marsh. Instead, his eyes drifted past him toward the distant tree line. He studied it with the quiet patience of someone reading whether he already understood. His hand settled naturally on the sheath once more while everyone else's attention shifted back toward Marsh and the demonstration table. The day continued as though nothing important had happened. High above the trees, however, the gray edge of an approaching storm continued moving closer, keeping to its own schedule. By late morning, the bright sky had disappeared beneath thick gray clouds. Marsh gathered the class and led everyone toward a shallow depression near the edge of the trees for the shelter-building exercise. "It's level, easy to reach, and perfect for filming," he explained confidently. Silas studied the location for several quiet seconds, longer than anyone else. "That ground won't drain," he finally said. "Nothing more." He didn't point. He didn't explain that the small basin, sitting just below a gentle rise, would collect rainwater the moment the storm arrived instead of letting it flow away. He had already noticed something else, too. The students practicing with the pump filter had trapped air inside the line during priming. If they actually needed water in a hurry, the filter would deliver barely half the flow it was designed for. Silas kept that observation to himself as well. No one had asked. Without even facing him, Marsh continued wrapping paracord around his arm. "It's flat, it's close, and we're not preparing for a hurricane," he replied. "We're building for a Saturday class." The same polite laughter floated through the group again. Quick. Automatic. Forgotten almost before it finished. Two students immediately began staking their tarp exactly where Silas had warned them, driving the pegs into soil that already felt softer than it should. Somewhere near the parking area, a truck door slammed shut. Moments later, a silver-haired man entered the clearing beside a teenage girl wearing an oversized Ridgeline Readiness t-shirt that clearly belonged to her by choice, not by size. He had driven 3 hours just to watch his granddaughter attend her first survival course. Carrying a folding stool under one arm that he never bothered to unfold, he stood with the quiet posture of someone who had spent a lifetime learning exactly how much space to occupy. His eyes swept across the class once, calmly and carefully, before he settled near the back with his hands relaxed at his sides. No one asked who he was. No one introduced him. Seeing a fresh audience, Marsh spoke just a little louder. He confidently assured everyone that the low ground offered textbook drainage. Only Silas truly knew otherwise. And Silas saw no reason to argue. The first raindrops arrived slowly. They were scattered enough to seem more like a warning than a storm. Still, 2 students hurried to grab rain jackets, and for the first time that morning, genuine concern briefly crossed Marsh's face. Just as quickly, it disappeared. "We'll adapt," he called out. "That's part of today's lesson." Silas said nothing. Instead, he quietly walked away from the group toward the higher ground he had noticed earlier. Near a stand of young pines, he crouched and began examining branches. His hands moved without haste, testing natural forks, laying one branch aside, picking up another several feet away, rejecting a third because his fingertips detected a tiny crack before his eyes ever confirmed it. It was the effortless rhythm of someone who had repeated the same task so many times that experience guided every movement before conscious thought ever caught up. Next, he gathered several pieces of deadfall, weighing each one instinctively in his hand the way a collector judges an old coin. No one paid attention. Not yet. Within minutes, the rain arrived in full force. Exactly as Silas had predicted, water rushed downhill from the higher ground and poured directly into the shallow basin. The tarp shelter flooded almost immediately. Students scrambled out carrying soaked backpacks as muddy water spread beneath their feet. Marsh hurried to pull on his rain jacket while shouting instructions, but the pounding rain swallowed most of his voice before anyone could hear it. The storm cared nothing about certifications. Or demonstrations. Or confidence. 30 people suddenly needed somewhere dry. Only one person had already prepared for that. 15 yards uphill, Silas was already working. Without asking permission or drawing attention to himself, he drew the bayonet from its worn leather sheath. Placing a sturdy piece of deadfall across another log, he struck the spine of the blade twice with a fist-sized rock. The wood split cleanly down the grain. The movements were identical to thousands he had made over decades in places where the weather had been harsher and the consequences far greater than a training course in Tennessee. Another piece followed. Then another. He carved matching notches into the forked branches he had selected earlier and planted them into the ground with practiced precision. A ridge pole settled perfectly across the supports. He never stopped to double-check. His hands already knew every step. After half a century of repetition, building shelter had become as natural as breathing. Fresh pine boughs came next. Layer after layer overlapped carefully, each one covering the edge of the one beneath it, just like shingles on a roof. Only this roofer was 75 years old, moving with remarkable speed while the rain intensified around him. A second layer. Then a heavier third. Each placed to shed water instead of trapping it. Down in the clearing, the teenage girl lowered her phone from Marsh's demonstration table. Without realizing it, she turned the camera uphill toward Silas instead. Nearby, a woman with athletic tape wrapped around one knee stopped adjusting her backpack altogether. She watched the shelter rise with quiet amazement. The silver-haired grandfather never changed his position. But his eyes followed every single movement Silas made. Not with curiosity. With recognition. Rain struck the pine boughs. Instead of collecting, it rolled cleanly away. By the time the storm reached its full strength, only 11 minutes after the first drops, Silas had completed a solid lean-to on the higher ground. Its floor remained dry. Its structure held firmly against the wind. There was enough room beneath it for 6 people to shelter comfortably without touching the walls. Before anyone officially directed them, 3 soaked students had already taken refuge inside. Silas didn't pause to admire what he had built. He walked straight over to the pump filter that still sat on the folding table, untouched in the middle of the chaos. Without offering an explanation, he released the trapped air from the line with 2 quick motions, the exact problem he had noticed nearly an hour earlier but had never mentioned. On the very next pump, clear water surged through the filter. The flow was nearly twice as strong as it had been all morning. One of the students operating it looked from the filter to Silas, then back again. The answer was already sitting in front of her before she found the words to ask the question. Silas simply nodded toward the shelter and continued on his way. The silence that followed wasn't caused by the rain. The storm still pounded the trees overhead. Voices still drifted through the clearing. But no one was discussing the shelter anymore. There are moments when doubt simply disappears because reality has already settled the argument. That kind of silence settled over the group like the heavy clouds hanging across the ridge. Marsh stood at its edge, his rain jacket only half zipped, watching water slide effortlessly off the pine boughs. Only minutes earlier, water had pooled beneath the shelter site he had confidently chosen. Now it rolled cleanly away from the one Silas had built. His jaw tightened. Almost unconsciously, his hand found the multi-tool clip to his belt. His thumb pressed against the clip once. Then again. Then stopped. His eyes moved from the shelter to the students gathered safely beneath it. Then they settled on Silas. The old man was kneeling beside the entrance, calmly feeding feather-thin curls of dry wood into a small fire sheltered beneath the overhang. Those delicate shavings had all been carved from the same piece of deadfall he had split only moments earlier. Behind him, the repaired pump filter continued delivering clean water without anyone paying attention to it. Exactly the way it should have been working from the very beginning. The laughter was gone. Completely. Marsh crossed the wet grass more slowly than he had walked anywhere else that day. Rainwater dripped steadily from his jacket. For the first time all morning, his phone wasn't anywhere in sight. He stopped a few feet from the fire. Close enough to feel its warmth. Not close enough to pretend he had helped create it. "I called it an antique," he said quietly, his voice carrying clearly across the small gathering. "I judged it before I ever saw what it could do." He never reached for the word sorry. Instead, he looked up at the pine boughs keeping 6 people perfectly dry. Then he glanced toward the water filter quietly flowing behind them. "I built this entire course around the belief that the right equipment solves the problem," he admitted. "But I never left room for the possibility that the person carrying the tool matters far more than the tool itself." For the first time that day, his movements weren't polished. He rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly. It was the first gesture that hadn't looked practiced for an audience. "I'd like you to stay for the rest of the weekend," he continued. "Not as another student. As an instructor." Rain continued dripping steadily from the edge of the shelter. Every drop followed the exact path Silas had designed it to take. Silas quietly placed another slender stick into the fire and waited until the flame caught before speaking. "The gear's fine," he said calmly. "Just don't mistake having more options for having more experience." He wasn't criticizing anyone. He wasn't trying to teach a lesson. He simply spoke the truth the way someone speaks about something they stopped needing to prove long ago. Only then did the silver-haired grandfather step forward. He approached the fire slowly, but his attention wasn't on the flames. His eyes rested on the worn bayonet lying across Silas's knees. He studied the blade carefully. More specifically, the pattern of wear along one side of its crossguard. After a long moment, he looked up. "That knife once cut me free," he said quietly. "A different jungle, a very long time before today." Silas met his gaze. He never asked which jungle. He didn't need to. Some histories reveal themselves through worn steel long before anyone says a name. Neither man explained any further. Some debts remain understood without ever being spoken aloud. A tool doesn't become trustworthy because it advertises 16 different functions. It earns trust because, when there was no backup plan and no second chance, it was the one thing someone reached for. It worked then. And it kept working every time afterward. If you believe experience proven under real pressure matters more than features listed on a package, let us know in the comments. And if you own a piece of gear that's earned every mark and scratch through years of real use, tell us what it is. This community was built for people who understand that true confidence isn't bought, it is earned through time, hardship, and experience. Silas slid the bayonet back into its weathered leather sheath. He banked the fire until it burned low, then quietly watched the rain continue flowing exactly where he had intended it to. Behind him, every phone in the clearing had stopped recording Marsh's demonstration table long before. No one had suggested they should. No one needed to. Most people believe the newest tool is automatically the better one. More features. More technology. More convenience. And because of that, they assume the person carrying it must know more too. That's exactly what everyone believed that morning. 30 students stood in the middle of the Appalachian foothills, surrounded by expensive survival equipment, cameras ready, waiting to learn from one of the most respected instructors in the region. They had come expecting to see modern gear outperform everything that came before it. Standing at the center of it all was Staff Sergeant Colby Marsh. Years of military experience. Dozens of survival certifications. Thousands of students trained. Tens of thousands of followers online. Every movement he made reflected confidence. Every recommendation sounded like unquestionable truth. If Marsh said a certain piece of equipment belonged in your pack, nobody argued. If he dismissed something as outdated, people accepted it without hesitation. After all, why wouldn't they? Success leaves a powerful impression. But standing quietly at the very back of the group was someone almost nobody noticed. A 75-year-old man wearing faded work clothes. No expensive backpack. No tactical vest. No brand new equipment hanging from every strap. Just an old leather sheath resting against his hip. The blade inside looked worn from decades of use. Its handle had been polished smooth by a hand that had carried it through places no one there could imagine. To most of the students, it looked ancient. Completely out of place among all the modern survival gear spread across the demonstration table. Some quietly assumed he was probably attending because he wanted to learn something new. Others guessed he simply hadn't kept up with changing technology. Nobody stopped to consider another possibility. Maybe he already knew more than everyone else standing there. Real experience has a strange habit. It rarely announces itself. It doesn't need expensive logos. It doesn't demand attention. And it almost never argues with people determined to underestimate it. The truly dangerous mistake isn't lacking knowledge. It's believing you've already learned everything worth knowing. That mistake is subtle. It grows through praise. Through success. Through years of hearing people tell you how capable you are. Eventually, confidence begins to sound exactly like certainty. And certainty often stops asking questions. That's where this story begins. Not with a storm. Not with a knife. Not even with an insult. It begins with assumptions. Because assumptions are often stronger than facts. People judge by appearance. By age. By equipment. By reputation. By followers. By credentials. They decide who deserves respect long before anyone has actually done anything. Sometimes they're right. Sometimes they're completely wrong. Nature has a way of exposing the difference. Out in the wilderness, weather doesn't care about popularity. Rain doesn't care how many certifications hang on a wall. Wind doesn't respect social media followers. And survival has never rewarded confidence alone. It rewards preparation. Judgment. Patience. And experience earned one difficult lesson at a time. That's what no one in that clearing understood yet. They believed the lesson waiting for them involved shelter building. Fire starting. Water purification. Instead, they were about to witness something far more valuable. The difference between owning good equipment and becoming the kind of person who can succeed with almost any equipment. Those are not the same thing. One can be purchased. The other has to be earned. Some tools look impressive because they're new. Others look ordinary because they've spent decades doing exactly what they were built to do. Scars don't always mean something is worn out. Sometimes they prove it has survived what newer things never faced. The old man standing quietly in the back carried more than a knife. He carried thousands of decisions. Thousands of mistakes already learned from. Thousands of moments where failure simply wasn't an option. None of that could be seen from the outside. All anyone noticed was old leather. Old steel. And an old man who didn't seem interested in proving himself to anyone. He never interrupted. He never bragged. He never corrected anyone. He simply watched. Sometimes the wisest person in the room speaks the least because experience teaches something pride never does. Truth doesn't become stronger because it's spoken louder. It simply waits until reality proves it. And reality was coming. Far sooner than anyone expected. Before the morning ended. Every laugh would disappear. Every assumption would be challenged. Every camera would quietly turn away from the instructor everyone came to watch. And toward the man almost everyone ignored. Because when the storm finally arrived, it wouldn't test equipment first. It would test judgment. And that's a test no amount of expensive gear can pass for you.